Well, it is my great honor to introduce to you our second speaker for tonight, Dr. Alan Hale, co-discoverer of Comet Hale-Bopp C 1995-01, also known as the Great Comet of 1997. But before I proceed, Edwin and I would like to share some personal comments.
Yeah, Comet Hale-Bopp is very special to us, Alan. Well, me in particular, because in the November 1995 issue of Sky and Telescope, I wrote this. Can you see it?
I think it's too close.
Yeah, oh, it's too close.
Or the color of the background.
You have to keep it close to your face there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway, we saw part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. The title is Comet Hale-Bopp is Coming, and so this was in November 1995. Just few months before perihelion, and we took a big risk. Sky and Telescope did, because we were not exactly sure how the comet is going to perform, but we believe that it's going to do very well. And so this was my first cover story for the magazine. And we're so glad it lived up to the expectations of people. And it was a spectacular comet. So thank you so much, Alan, for co-discovering Comet Hale-Bopp.
Yeah.
And
I hadn't planned to, but
and as Tarek said earlier, the number of years when we first met, nothing will beat this one. Edwin and I first met Alan almost 40 years ago, in June 1985, to be exact, during the third American workshop on cometary astronomy, which was held at the University of Arizona's Flandreau Planetarium in Tucson. Alan was working at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory at that time. Edwin and I were still practically kids. They called us kids back then. And meeting all these renowned comet observers was a dream come true for both of us, since we just published earlier that year our first book on astronomy, on Comet Halley in particular, with the National Research Council of the Philippines as our publisher. Alan Hale was born in Tachikawa, Japan, in 1958, the son of a U.S. Air Force officer. His family moved later that year to Alamogordo, New Mexico. Alan attended the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in physics in 1980. In 1983, Alan began working at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, as an engineer contractor for this deep space network. While at JPL, he was involved with several spacecraft projects, most notably the Voyager 2 encounter with the planet Uranus in 1986. In 1989, Alan earned his master's degree and PhD in astronomy from New Mexico State University in Las Cruces in 1989 and 1992, respectively. In 1993, he founded the Southwest Institute for Space Research, now the Earthrise Institute. In recent years, Alan has been collaborating with Global Sky Partners, Educators Forum of the Las Cumbres Observatory. As part of his collaboration, he performs frequent imaging of comets and asteroids, including follow-up observations of new discoveries. Through this effort, he has successfully recovered a few expected periodic comets, including the historically significant Comet 13T Olbers in August 2023. A prolific visual comet observer for nearly 55 years, Alan says his lifetime comet tally stands at 760, which includes 533 separate comets, the remainder being additional returns of periodic comets contained within that list of 533. Overall, Allen has made 8,147 visual observations of all these various comets.
Just a quick note. I think, Alan, right? Your comet tally now stands at 761 because
That
you
is
just
correct.
observed C 2024 G3 Atlas.
Yes.
And in 1991, the International Astronomical Union named asteroid 1985 HV1 as 4151 Alan Hale in his honor. And his devotion to not just comets, but sharing his observations with people, with the public. His public outreach is commendable. Tonight, he was when we were planning this, Alan. You remember you said you were gonna check into a hotel to do this presentation if you were to observe the comet earlier in the evening there. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Alan Hale.
Thank you. I'm actually at home. I made my trip to Alamogordo for comet observing earlier in the week, and it was almost clouded out, except for a brief 30-second view through clouds. But I decided not to make that trip anymore. It's a 2-hour round trip drive, and I'm just not up to doing that and putting my wife through that anymore. So let me go ahead, and we did this once before.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get this thing going. Let's go play from start. Are we there? Everyone can see my title slide?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
Thank you. Yeah, we can.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right.
We're good.
I just want to make sure everyone can see my title slide. Okay. When you put together that flyer on the talk, all you could find was a picture of me taken back in 1996 or thereabouts. And I sure wish I still looked like that. But time has a way of doing things. So I did want to share this picture. This is kind of what it'll look like now. Of course, you can still see my video there. This I'm newly remarried. My longtime partner, Vicki, and I married this past August, and here at our place in the mountains east of Cloudcroft. And this was taken at our wedding. This is Vicki and me with my 2 grown sons and their families. You can see I've got 3 grandkids. So I just kind of wanted to share that what I look like now. I'm making this kind of a more personal talk, perhaps, than the one you just heard from Tarek, but I'm going to kind of describe kind of what are some of the things I've done through those 55 plus years that I've been glued to a telescope. I came of age during the 1960s, and there were a lot of things going on during that time, including the Apollo program and the whole rush to the moon, and I really was caught up in that. This is Neil Armstrong stepping onto the surface of the moon, and I took this picture right off of our television screen at that time. I still have the pictures, but I took that. That's a picture that I took. Thought I might be doing that someday myself. Well, didn't quite work out that way. There's a lot of reasons for that. But anyway, one other influence, some of you might remember this particular TV show, that the whole concept of exploring strange new worlds and everything really kind of caught me up, and I was really excited about that. But one of the biggest excitements is I lived on the outskirts of Alamogordo, and the skies were pretty dark right there. I had this pretty dark night skies right outside my bedroom window and right in our front yard. And between all these various things and numerous other factors all kind of got me all caught up, and I started read books on astronomy, learned my way kind of around the sky, and then I played the old Bart Simpson, Dad, I want a telescope, Dad, I want a telescope, Dad, I want a telescope. He finally broke down and got me one, which was, I knew enough that I wanted the telescope that had the largest aperture, not the one that had the most power. And this is from Sears, 4.5-inch reflector that I acquired. And it occurred to me as I was preparing this talk that I began using that telescope exactly 55 years ago tonight. January 18th, 1970 was the first time I used this telescope. And the first thing I observed with that telescope is something I think most of you will recognize. This is not a very good picture of the Orion Nebula M42. I took this several years ago when I was trying out the new DSLR camera that I had recently purchased. So you see there's a little bit of trailing, but that was the first thing I ever saw with that telescope. And I was looking at everything around the sky. And I was already subscribing to Sky and Telescope magazine at that time. And there was word about a comet that was in the sky, Comet Tago-Sato-Kosaka, which in January of 1970 was the first comet ever to be observed from space. The OAO telescope had observed it in January, detected the large Lyman alpha collide of hydrogen around the comet, which had been predicted quite a few years earlier, but we now actually saw it for real. This is the sketch I made of Comet Tago-Sato-Kosaka that first night in February of 1970 through that 4.5-inch telescope. This little fuzzy thing with a condensation and some stars. So I still keep that drawing. I was already excited about that, but a month and a half later, along comes Comet Bennett, which was truly a spectacular, bright, great comet. This is my first attempt at comet photography. So I'm 12 years old. This is a handheld Brownie camera, and I'm standing on the doorstep of our front door looking east towards the mountains. And hardly a great photograph, but you could definitely see the comet right there. Fortunately, there were people around who knew what they were doing. This is a photograph of Comet Bennett taken that exact same morning from Switzerland over the Swiss Alps by Claude Nicollier, who later went on to become an astronaut for ESA and flew 4 straight shuttle missions. So I think at that point I was hooked. And it became, I guess one could almost say, an obsession with me to see how many comets I could see. Anyone that came along, I was out there trying to see it. The spring of my senior year of high school came Comet West, which I still consider to be the best comet I have ever seen. I took this picture one morning from, at that time, what was called White Sands National Monument. It's now White Sands National Park. My father took this picture 2 mornings later from the front door of our house in Alamogordo. And I still consider that the best comet I've ever seen. I was hoping I would someday see something better than it. That hasn't quite happened. I'm okay. Comet West is still the best. This kind of a little aside. I met Richard West a number of years ago at International Conference on Comet Hale-Bopp at the Canary Islands. And we fell into, I call it an argument, but it really wasn't. It was just a playful, good-natured discussion topic being who had the better comet. And both of us took the position that the other guy's comet was better. Maybe if one looked at things from a scientific perspective, maybe I might agree with him. But I think just from an overall perspective, which one was better in terms of looking at the sky, I still think his was the better comet. Anyway, and got involved in a science fair when I was in high school. My junior year, the near-Earth asteroid 433 Eros made a close approach to Earth. I did a project on it, investigated numerous things. For my science fair display, I used a log spray painted black on top of the pedestal of a bird bath. That was my model for Eros. And there it is. I actually won first place in my division at the State Science Fair with this project. It was really thrilled when a quarter century later, the near-Earth asteroid rendezvous near Shoemaker spacecraft went into orbit around Eros, eventually landed on the surface after conducting an investigation for a year. So that's what Eros really looks like. You can compare it with what my model of it was all those years before that. And as Imelda mentioned, when I worked at JPL, I was involved with the Voyager 2 encounter with Uranus. I was on the DSN side with the radio science experiment. So all those results that you see about the composition of Uranus's rings and the composition of the atmosphere, a lot of that came from the radio science experiment. And I ended up being a rather essential part of that. I consider that encounter, that event, one of the highlights of my life. So much so that this was our sequence of events. It was such a big event to me. Got this and got all my coworkers to autograph the sequence of events for me as a keepsake. So there we are. Those are some people that really made that event happen. So thank all those people. And of course, that was also right around the time that Halley was here, and Edwin and Melda pointed out that that's when we first met, was right around that time frame. This was a photo of Comet Halley that I took on the road to Mount Wilson on my 28th birthday. I thought it was just a very lovely object. It was nice to see. I was involved with the Halley Watch at the time and followed that comet for a long, long time. I left to California later that year, returned to New Mexico, entered the graduate program at New Mexico State University. Instead of studying comets, I probably surprised a lot of people. I went to and studied exoplanets, which at that time was a theoretical subject. So I did since I couldn't study exoplanets per se, I did the next best thing, which I studied solar type binary stars. And so this was my PhD dissertation. This was the published version in the Astronomical Journal, published in 1994. I have been pleasantly surprised that this paper has been cited over and over and over again. It has been cited over 250 times since its original publication, including 5 times in 2024. I was just looking at the list of citations just from last year's papers. There was one paper that cited some of my results in their conclusions about what you may remember as Boyajian star, which is a star that Kepler found that some people speculated might have the extraterrestrial super civilizations and that type of thing, with that big hoopla a few years ago. Anyway, one of my mentors in my PhD search was a gentleman named Lawrence Doyle at the SETI Institute at Ames Research Center. He encouraged me to look at what was called the photometric method, or sometimes it's called the transit method. I didn't think too much of the method at the time until I looked at it through his encouragement, concluded that it was actually quite a valid way of looking for planets. Thanks to various events, I ended up leaving that research field. Lawrence stayed with it, and Lawrence was one of the main investigators with the Kepler mission, and he was the lead scientist on the team that discovered Kepler-16, which was the first known example of what's a Tatooine system, i.e. a planet orbiting two stars. And when Kepler-16 was discovered, he got a lot of press coverage, again, a Tatooine system. I was very thrilled for my former colleague, Lawrence, when he was part of that team. I was really, really thrilled for him. Good work. I'm glad he kept it up. In here in New Mexico, I've been involved in a number of things, including the commercial space industry. I live fairly close to White Sands Missile Range, and this is where the experimental DCX rocket was flying in the mid-1990s. I was able to go out there and watch several of the launches. That was a really cool thing. I was glad to be there and be a part of that. But of course, things really changed for me one summer night in July of 1995. I was in my regular comet observing program, taking a break, and I decided I'd just look at some deep sky objects, one of those being the globular star cluster M70 in Sagittarius, when I noticed that there was a little fuzzy thing nearby that I had not recalled seeing there before. Ran a number of checks, found out there really was nothing there. After about 40 minutes, I could tell that it was moving with respect against the background stars. This is an image that was taken the following night by Wayne Johnson with the Orange County astronomers in California. And of course, this was the IAU's announcement of the discovery by myself and by another astronomer in Arizona, Thomas Bopp, whom I did not know at the time. Obviously, Tom and I got to know each other quite well in the couple of years that followed after that. You all know what happened. You all saw Hale-Bopp. I'm sure all you did. Very spectacular object in the morning sky initially, and then it moved over into the evening sky. This is a photograph I took from the deck of my house on the day of perihelion, April 1st, 1997. I always thought it was appropriate that my comet would pass perihelion on April Fool's Day. I could not think of a more appropriate day for that to happen. It's funny, the television crew from CNN Science and Technology Week was at my house interviewing me. They have video of me taking this particular photograph. I don't know what they did with it, but they took video of that. This was just taken a week later. Again, my life was very interesting during that time, as you might imagine. I got and speaking invitations all over the country, even all over the world, interviewed constantly. It kind of got old after a while, especially when I get asked a lot of inane questions over and over again. It's interesting being a pop culture icon for at least a little while. That was then. I had some fun with it for a while. I had my car license plate. I had the Discovery designation of Hale-Bopp on it. Got to do some cool things, including a comet viewing session at the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. For those of you who are not Americans, you may or may not know that the Naval Observatory is the residence of the U.S. Vice President. So I had a private comet viewing session at the Naval Observatory with Alan Tipper Gore. Al Gore was the Vice President of the United States at that time. So the weather wasn't all that cooperative, unfortunately. There were thunderstorm cells moving through the area, but occasional clear periods. Yes, we did get to see it on a few occasions. I did compliment the Vice President on the nice observatory he had there in his backyard. A few years later, I got invited to be involved in some educational projects. We had a big fundraising event in 2001, the Arthur C. Clarke Gala that was held at the Playboy Mansion in Los Angeles. You can tell I'm not very experienced at wearing tuxedos and everything, but there are quite a few interesting dignitaries at this event. That is Jim Lovell, the second man on the moon. The MC of the event was Patrick Stewart, and one of our other big dignitaries was Morgan Freeman, and one other one was Jim Cameron, who was still kind of riding high on the way from his movie Titanic, and Jim Cameron was regaling me with stories about how Comet Hale-Bopp was actually involved in the filming of Titanic. He told me some of the interesting stories about that. But again, that was a long time ago. That was over 20 years ago, a full generation ago. This was the last photograph I ever took of Hale-Bopp. This was in May of 1998 that I took from about an hour's drive north of Coonabarabran in New South Wales. This is the last image that's been taken, at least thus far. Hale-Bopp, this was taken with the James Webb Telescope in July of 2022, when Hale-Bopp was at a heliocentric distance of 46 astronomical units. The fact that it is still visible at all at that kind of a distance will tell you just how large a comet this really was. For me, meanwhile, well, I'm nothing more than an occasional question on Jeopardy. This was a question in Celebrity Jeopardy about a year ago, and none of the contestants got it right. Talk about a disappointment. But then in one of the other Jeopardy episodes running around that same time, none of the contestants knew who Jim Lovell was, so I didn't feel so bad. Anyway, I was able to get some funding for some research efforts, including some equipment for some that I did. So I was use some CCD cameras to do some asteroid and comet work. These are some images I took of the asteroid 35396 1997 XF11 when it made a close approach in 2002. This asteroid had made a big hoopla a few years earlier when orbit calculations showed it'd be making an extremely close approach to Earth in the year 2028. It will indeed pass about just over 2 lunar distances from Earth in October of that year. I was able to take some images of Comet Wield 2. I took it when it was passing by the Crab Nebula, that were used in navigating the Stardust mission as it was en route to that comet, which you would encounter actually just a few months later. And this is a Stardust image of the nucleus of Comet Wield 2. I was able to utilize my recognition, my international name, to do a lot of outreach, and I consider science diplomacy, since I did have an internationally known name. There was a total solar eclipse that crossed Iran in August of 1999, and I was able to lead a delegation of American scientists and students, educators to Iran. We spent 2 weeks in that country watching the eclipse. There I am right there. We got one astronaut to join us. This is Russell Schweikert, who was the lunar module pilot on the Apollo 9 mission. Those of you who may have followed SOHO comets, at that time, the SOHO comet guy was Doug Biesecker, who I convinced to be a part of our effort there. And we observed it from a resort village in Iran, about a 2 hours drive west of the city of Esfahan. This picture was taken the day before, and you'll notice there were quite a few clouds. Fortunately, those clouds cleared out. We had clear skies for the eclipse. This was just a picture of me and my contact with the organization Search for Common Ground that facilitated our visit, and some of the Iranian children at one of the places we visited. The scientific foundation that sponsored our group, even in their eclipse guide, even included a mention of me in their eclipse guide. So any of you who can read Farsi, there I am. The International Year of Astronomy, I was able to do something else, participate some events in Beirut, Lebanon. And here we've got students who were kind of reimagining some of the exploits of the ancient Phoenician sailors, and then coming off and being little space visitors going else everywhere. So kind of interesting little event that one of my contacts in Beirut put together. I was officially recognized for a lot of my efforts here by being a finalist in the National Citizens Award by the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor Society. I'm really humbled, really, and honored that my efforts received recognition from such a prestigious organization. I'm more than just an astronomer. I'm a husband and a father and a grandfather. I've done a few other things in my life too. For a while, I hosted a weekly radio show on one of the local radio stations, and I played a lot of music. I have a very wide range of musical taste, but interviewed a lot of guests on a wide variety of topics, including science and space, as well as other topics. I've also done some acting. For a long time, I was a member of our local acting troupe, and we did a lot of plays, a lot of melodrama plays. I quite often was the bad guy, and I loved playing the bad guy. I mean, you get to act like a jerk in total public and get away with it. So that's me in my favorite bad boy costume, my bad guy costume. I've continued my educational efforts. I taught for several years as teaching online university level classes. And I once taught for the International Space University's Southern Hemisphere Space Study Program in Adelaide, South Australia. This was a few years ago. My older son actually lives in Adelaide. So this gave me an excuse not only to observe some of the southern skies, but also to visit my son, who was there at the time. 5 years ago, I created an online educational program I called Ice and Stone 2020 to mark the 50th anniversary of my first comet observation, the 25th anniversary of my discovery of Comet Hale-Bopp. Every week, I had new presentations on various topics in the solar system's small bodies, comets, asteroids, venturing into planetary satellites, zodiacal dust, even every kind of subject I can think of, space missions to them, even pop culture and pop music songs about them. Imelda, you mentioned asteroid 4151 Allen Hale. And when I was doing a presentation on main belt asteroids, it occurred to me, what better asteroid to use as an example than that particular asteroid? So a few months earlier, I had taken some images to show about 2 hours apart to show its motion. Now, the blue arrow is asteroid Allen Hale. Now, I showed these images without arrows to my then partner, now wife, Vicky, to see if she could find it. She didn't find it, but she found another asteroid in the same images that happen to be passing by in the same field of view. That's the yellow arrows. That's asteroid 75591. It had been discovered in the year 2000 by the Linear program here in New Mexico. And I actually knew Grant Stokes, who's the PI of the Linear program. I contacted him about naming it, perhaps, in honor of my wife, or my then partner. He said, well, after 10 years, the discoverer no longer has naming rights and anyone can suggest a name. So I suggested a name to the Small Bodies Names Committee, the IAU, and they accepted it. So that asteroid now has the name Stone Mose. My partner's maiden name is Stone. Her former married name before marrying me was Mosley, so Stone Mose. And I remember Imelda and Edwin, around the time you were married, I was seeing T-shirts with a slogan that says, date an astronomer. Who else can promise you the sun, moon, and stars and deliver? Well, my lady has a rock up there with her name on it. So beat that. Anyway, so that's that is the two of us together in space, at least for a little while on one day in 2019. Imelda mentioned my collaboration with the Las Cumbres Observatory, and in fact, those two images were taken. I took those via LCO. They're a group of remotely controlled telescopes sited at some of the top observatory sites around the world. There's McDonald Observatory in Texas, which is not too far from me. Canary Islands. There's one in Siding Spring, New South Wales. South African Observatory. Cerro Tololo in Chile, and Haleakala in Hawaii. And through them and through an outfit affiliated with LCO called Global Sky Partners. Global Sky Partners is a worldwide forum of educators based literally all around the world. We have monthly Zoom calls. We have partners from, of course, here in the US and in America, in South America, Asia, Africa, India. And we get together every month, and one or more will present a presentation on what they're doing. I am absolutely floored by some of the outstanding work that they are doing with their students. One of the finest group of people I've ever been pleased and honored to be associated with. I really look forward to our monthly Zoom meetings. We're having our next one later this coming week, and I'm just anxious to see what we'll be having then. And I work with them and I assist them if they have any questions about observing comets or small near-Earth asteroids or asteroids in general. But they do all sorts of things. They do exoplanets, novae and supernovae, stellar evolution, all kinds of things that they incorporate into their educational programs. These are just some of the images I've taken over the last few years with LCO. This is Comet 2I Borisov, which was the interstellar comet that passed through the solar system at the end of 2019. Now, this is the main belt asteroid 6478 Gault, which at the end of 2018, early 2019, was discovered to have a long tail associated, and I was able to confirm the presence of that tail. So, and actually the discovery announcement that announces that, you'll see my confirming observations that was taken with LCO. There's the big hoodoo with the asteroid Apophis, which is going to be passing extremely close to Earth in just a little over 4 years on April 13th, 2029, which, by the way, happens to be a Friday. And it will pass within pass within the orbit of geosynchronous satellites here on Earth. One of the last occasions to get some good images of and observations of Apophis was 4 years ago when Apophis made a somewhat close approach to Earth, and that is it right there. I normally don't do main belt asteroids, but I do some on occasion. I'm going to flip back and forth. Can you see the moving asteroid? Well, this was as I had mentioned, the IAU does allow people non-discoverers to submit suggestions for names of asteroids. So I submitted a few. They accepted a couple of my suggestions, and this asteroid was the recipient of one of those names that I suggested. That is the asteroid Johnny Cash. As a longtime fan of Johnny Cash from my childhood days, I was pleased and honored that I was able to get an asteroid named in his honor. I sent those two images and this citation to the Johnny Cash Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't know what they did with it, but at least they have it, and they could do with it whatever they wanted. I continue to do lots of work, especially for objects on the Minor Planet Center's Near Earth Object Confirmation page and possible comet confirmation page. This is an image that I took right at the end of 2024 of Martin Machik's comet discovery 2024 Y1. So if you look at the discovery announcement for that comet, you'll see a couple of sets of images of astrometric measurements that I've taken via LCO. And there's a kind of a stacked series of images of that comet right there. I don't remember the exact date. It was something like December 28th or 29th of last year. And then Imelda mentioned this. Whoops. Do you see the faint moving object? Everyone see that? That is the recovery images of Comet 13P Olbers that I took on August 24th, 2023 with one of the 1 meter telescopes of the Los Cumbres Observatory. The comet was about 22nd magnitude at that time, very dim. I had been looking for this comet for months, and I was shocked when I saw this moving object, and I was able to immediately order up other images. One of the nice things about LCO with all these various telescopes is that you have to deal with artifacts all the time, but the fact that I was able to find consistent images with other telescopes proved that this was not an artifact, that this was an actual object moving. And when I submitted the astrometry, the fit was perfect. The calculations had been off by about 18 hours, which is not surprising after 70 years. So that's Olbers, which passed perihelion in June of this year. This is a photograph that I took. There's Comet Olbers right there. This is just that DSLR camera on tripod. I took that in early August of this year. Anyway, so that's was Comet Olbers. I continue to observe the comets that come by. Usually, this is Comet Neowise in July of 2020. I had to drive about an hour away from my residence to get a flat horizon in the Northeast for this morning observation. And I took this from my residence a couple of weeks later. I wanted to get an image and photo of the comet on the 25th anniversary of the Hale-Bopp discovery. However, July is our rainy season in these parts, and I was clouded out on that night, but I had taken this picture the night before, just in case, because it was clear. So just in case. So there's Comet Neowise, and that's helped me mark my anniversary. And then, of course, we had a very bright one earlier this year, or late last year, Comet Tsuchinshan Atlas. These are various images I took it various times with LCO. This was when the comet was still on the PCCP. So I had several sets of astrometric measurements on the discovery announcement, and you can see how it brightened over the course of the next several months. And so it was brightest. It was made a brief appearance in the morning sky late September, and then in the evening sky around mid-October. And unfortunately, my body decided to pull a fast one on me. And I ended up coming down with a bacterial lung infection, which collapsed my lung, one of my lungs. And I had to spend 3 weeks in the hospital right during the time that this comet was bright in the morning sky. And I missed the whole morning apparition because I was confined to a hospital room. After being there, I was transferred to a rehab facility in Las Cruces, but at least I could get out of bed. And I was able to convince the staff at the rehab facility to wheel me out to the parking lot in the evenings to catch the comet in the evening sky. So at least I was able to view the great appearance of Comet Tsuchinshan Atlas from the evening sky, from that rehab facility. There it is. And gratitude for what the staff did for me, I made arrangements with the local Astronomical Society to bring telescopes so we could have a viewing party for the staff and residents of the rehab facility. And on one of the nights, so there we are. I happen to have a friend who's a state senator from here in New Mexico named Jeff Steinborn, who came to that little star party, I guess you could call it. And that's me in the wheelchair right there. And of course you can see the comet. He took this with his smartphone. And the comet itself was still bright, even for there. So at least I was able to see that part of the appearance of the comet. But I had been thinking, sorry, I'm getting older. I hate to admit it, but after 55 years of this, my body is finally saying enough. And that 3-week stay in the hospital really kind of stated that rather emphatically. So I kept the observing up until the end of 2024. This was my final comet observation, visual comet observation before the end of the year. This is comet 29P Schwarzmann-Volkmann 1, which travels in a circular orbit between Jupiter and Saturn, undergoes occasional outbursts. I've been following this comet since 1981, so I've got over 40 years of observations of this comet. And it happened to have a pair of large outbursts in November of 2024, and had expanded quite a bit by the end of the year. Actually, just had another outburst earlier this year, but say I, quote, retired, unquote, from visual observing as of the end of the year. And Amela pointed out all the numbers, 760 comets, 8,147, I think, number observations. But I decided I would not walk away from it entirely. I would, if something bright or interesting came along, I would drag myself out and look at it. And lo and behold, something bright and interesting came along. I actually knew this well ahead of time. This was Comet Atlas 2024 G3. These are some images that I've taken again with LCO. This particular image right there was while it was still on the PCCP. Astrometry was included on Discovery announcements. My last LCO image was taken in late August. It's right there. This was primarily, almost exclusively, in fact, a Southern Hemisphere comet, or a space comet. This was taken by astronaut Don Pettit aboard the International Space Station. I believe that was on January 11th that he took that photo. For those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, it was almost, not quite, but almost a complete bust. However, it became bright enough to see during the daytime. This is a photograph taken by an amateur astronomer in Hungary, Monica Landi-Gajabnar, and she gave me permission to use this image. I successfully observed the comet in daytime a few mornings ago. This is kind of what it looked like through the telescope I was using. Bright condensation, slightly curved tail. It's a treat to see any comet during the day. It happens very, very rarely. And I had hoped to observe it in the evening sky. I did make the drive down to Alamogordo, as I had mentioned a couple of nights ago, just to have some cirrus clouds move in at an inopportune time. I got to see it for 30 seconds through a gap in the clouds, and that was it. But the Southern Hemisphere is now really starting to get a comet show. This was taken yesterday by Rob Kaufman in Victoria. This is the show that the Southern Hemisphere is starting to get as we speak. So I hope they enjoy their show, because they should get a good one. So in closing, especially my encouragement for any young students who are participating tonight. I came across this photo on Facebook a while back, and I thought it was rather appropriate. I would just say not only enjoy it, but make it count. Make your time here count. That's what I've tried to do, is make my time here count. However much time I have left, and however much my body allows me to keep on going, I'll try to keep on doing things to make my time here worthwhile. The sky is still there. I won't be out there at nights observing comets all the time anymore, but it's still there, and I'll still be enjoying it. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was very inspiring, especially for our young viewers. It's very inspiring to hear from you, Alan. And maybe I would call you a modern day Charles Messier, ferret of comets.
Yeah.
for us, no? And let me proceed now to our Q&A.
Mhm.
One of the first questions here is from one of our attendees here in the Philippines, Dante De Jesus. Do comets emit light of their own, if any at all? Do comets have magnetic fields?
Yes, they do have magnetic fields because they interact with the solar wind, and which ionizes their tail. They've been ever since the mid 1990s with Comet Hyakutake. In fact, comets have actually been observed to give off X-rays. There's a lot of complex physics going on yes, they do have magnetic fields of sorts. They interact with
Kailan nga ba
interact
yun?
with the solar wind.
Sabay halo sila ng Yakutake, di ba?
97
Nag-abot
Hale-Bopp.
ba sila?
Hindi. 96 Hyakutake. The
Do they
following.
have light? Yeah.
Eh?
And do they have light of their own? Well, if you see that picture right there of Hale-Bopp, you see that blue tail, that is actually ionized gas. Those are ions still fluorescing. The solar wind actually ionizes molecules,
Dust.
or ionizes atoms in the Comet's environment and blows back out. The white is due to reflected sunlight, dust in the dust tail. So you've got both the intrinsic light and reflected light in comets. And depending on which regime you're looking at, there's again all sorts of interesting physics and interesting chemistry going on with these objects.
Thank you, Alan. Actually, this second question is for us amateurs. In this day and age of surveys, robotic telescopes, is there still any room for amateurs to discover comets? And what is your tip regarding these young amateurs? And which part of the night sky is more likely? Where would they look at to make discoveries today? And what tips can you give? Yeah.
Well, in all honesty, of course, more and more of the sky is being covered by surveys. In fact, when the Vera Rubin survey comes online, supposed to come online sometime later this year, they'll be observing the entire sky visible from Chile every 2 or 3 nights down to 24th magnitude. That's going to probably preclude a lot of the discoveries already there. There are amateurs still making discoveries, but by using CCDs or DSLRs. There have been a handful of discoveries over the last couple of years. By people using techniques like that. Generally, they look close to the sun. Probably one of the most prolific observers and discoverers of both comets and near-Earth asteroids as an amateur is Gennady Borisov in Ukraine. I mentioned his name earlier. He's the one that discovered the interstellar comet from 2019. And he regularly is finding all sorts of, especially near-Earth asteroids. He observes at small elongations, generally in early pre-dawn skies, and that's where he's been finding most of his discoveries. There's a couple of amateurs that use a remote telescope in Namibia who have found a few near-Earth asteroids and one comet a little over a year ago. There was a group in Brazil that successfully found a few comets. It's been a few years, but they found some. But I say as more and more surveys cover more and more parts of the sky, that's going to probably become less and less. And I know that sounds a little bit discouraging to whoever asked that question, but that's kind of the reality. The one thing I will say in encouragement is that the Rubin survey, again, they're based in Chile. There is a part of the northern sky that they will not be able to cover. But then, of course, there are all the northern hemisphere surveys, like the Catalina survey, the Pan-STARRS and Atlas surveys, and so on. Again, the one thing that they don't really cover is the areas that are at fairly small elongations close to the sun. That's probably still your best bet if you're interested in actually making a discovery.
Thank you. Alan, do you think we'll have another Comet Hale-Bopp in the sky? Historically, when can we have something like that again?
Well, what made Hale-Bopp so unusual, other than the fact it had my name on it, of course, was that it was intrinsically very bright. If you were to line up all the comets ever observed through history, it would be about the second or third brightest comet ever seen, if observed under identical circumstances to all the other ones. It just was intrinsically very bright. It was visible for a long time. I mean, really, to be visible at 10th or 11th magnitude, which is how bright it was when I found it, at a distance of 7 AU from the sun, is just totally remarkable. So comets like that really don't come by very often. There is one comet that was discovered a few years ago that has an intrinsic brightness similar to that. That's comet 2014 UN 271, named Bernardinelli Bernstein. It was discovered by the dark energy camera in Chile. It doesn't pass perihelion until 2031. Unfortunately, that perihelion is almost 11 AU out. So it's not going to get very bright, even though intrinsically it is very bright. I've actually been imaging it occasionally with LCO. It's pretty easy to see in the LCO images. Naked eye comets on the average come by about 1, 2 every year or so. In fact, 2024 had 3 comets that were naked eye visible. Hans Brooks reached about 5th magnitude. Olbers got the 6th, and of course, Tsuchinshan Atlas got the 1st magnitude or brighter. And of course, now Comet Atlas got to at least -2 or -3, near the sun, of course. Great comets, depending on how you define that particular term, on the average come by perhaps once a decade or so. I mean, there's just a discussion on Facebook recently whether or not Tsuchinshan Atlas and the current Comet Atlas could be considered great comets or not. To me personally, I am not going to be able to see Comet Atlas at its best because I'm in the northern hemisphere. Tsuchinshan Atlas to me was a borderline great comet. I could easily see 18 degrees of tail naked eye. Unfortunately, the timing was bad because it was at its best when there was a full moon in the sky. And of course, I could not see it from even a dark sky because I was at a rehab facility in a metropolitan area, although at least I was on the outskirts and the light pollution wasn't too bad. Neowise was another borderline great comet. Comet McNaught in 2007, based on the images I saw and the accounts I read, was definitely a great comet from the southern hemisphere. Again, I don't live in the southern hemisphere, so I missed out on that. Although I did get to see that comet during daytime as well. So it's just kind of random. I was privileged to see 4 great comets during the latter part of the 20th century, Comet Bennett, Comet West, Comet Hyakutake, and then that one has my name on it. So
Thank you.
we'll have to see.
Yeah.
I mean, the next one could come at any time, or it
Yeah.
might be another 10 or 20 years.
Thank you. But we're hoping we'll have one in this decade. This is a question from one of our attendees, Rom Candaza. You are an inspiring icon of astronomy. I myself follow this hobby. My question is, how did you sustain this? Did the US government support you in documenting after you found Hale-Bopp, or do you have a day job before? Thank you.
I didn't get any funding directly from this. I was kind of a struggling, not quite entirely unemployed astronomer when Hale-Bopp struck. The notoriety that thing gave me, I was able to parlay that into some success. I got some grants, some funding to carry out some work. I mentioned some of the early work that I was doing that I got as a result of some funding. That educational program that I was involved with that got me out to the Playboy Mansion that time. I got some funding for that to carry out some good work. Of course, I've done freelance writing for decades now. I had some income that way. I wrote a book on Hale-Bopp at the time that did fairly well. I was quite a guest speaker for quite a while. I mean, that's kind of all in the past now. Like I say, I'm a Jeopardy question now. I taught online university classes for several years. I'm pretty much retired from all that now. My wife and I are living on Social Security and my freelance income, and maybe there might be some educational projects or two in the future that I might be working on. So, as far as for what sustained me, I guess it was just my passion for the night sky and for observing all these things that really sustained me. I mean, I never gave up my love of that. Certainly stumbling across that comet at that time in my life helped a lot. I don't think it's probably too much to hope for that to happen to everyone. It'd be nice if it would, but but even if I hadn't have found it, I'd have still kept on going. I just enjoyed it too much and got too much. It meant too much to me personally to give it out. I mean, it's brought me to a lot of places around the world, met a lot of interesting people. I've done a lot of interesting things, at least I like to think I have. And let's see, I've been at it for over 55 years now. So, and we'll keep at it at some level for however long my body lets me.
Thank you. Thank you for continuing and continuing to inspire us as well. And this is from Patrick Stonehouse. I guess, you know, you and I have both experienced that magical moment of discovering a new comet. You met me and my young son and daughter at IWCA2, University of Cambridge, where Don McCall said it was still possible to make a visual discovery. And this is related to the previous question before. Do you think a new visual discovery is still possible? Yeah, I think you partially answered this already.
Yeah. In my honest opinion is probably not, but there's the old adage, never say never. I saw Don Machholz. Of course, Don Machholz passed away about 2 years ago. Sadly, I've known Don since the early 1980s and confirmed several of his comet discoveries. The last time I saw Don was at the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference in 2018, which was one of the last ones that was held. And he told me at that time that he was still hunting for comets. I wished him good luck, but I felt in all honesty that with all the surveys and everything, he would probably never find another one. And lo and behold, about 6 months later, he found one. It was the first visual comet discovery in 8 years. There hasn't been one since. But I guess never say never, but who knows?
Thank you. So keep on trying. So a follow-up question from Patrick Stonehouse. Climate change has extremely limited my ability to observe comets here in northern Michigan. Considering climate change, is there a safe place in the world to make observations most nights during the year? Maybe Cebu here in the Philippines, where I see Chris Go makes great observations during the year. But of course, Chris Go makes planetary observations, which doesn't require dark skies.
I'm not enough of an expert on climate change to really comment truthfully on how much it might affect things, especially on a global basis. Some areas are going to get worse. Some areas will probably get better. Charles Morris, whom I think some of you know, lives northwest of LA, and he's told me that climate change has really made his observing conditions quite a bit worse over the past several years. So he's not able to do much of anything anymore from where he's at. From here, where I'm at, of course, we have year-to-year variations. Say we have our summer rainstorms during the summer, in the middle of the year. Last year, we did not get much of a rainy season. It's been that way for a couple of years now, although the year before that was heavy. Climate change might make things drier here. which might make for more dark skies, more clear skies during that time of the year. But all this, again, there's year-to-year variations as well, superimposed on a longer-term trend. And I think, again, I'm not enough of a climatologist to be able to comment on what those changes are going to be. I know there are obviously people who have done the modeling on that. The one thing that isn't pressed upon me is that the climate change, the Earth's atmosphere is a nonlinear system, which is scientific jargon for chaotic in a mathematical sense, which is that even the small changes can wreak small changes in initial conditions can wreak unpredictable changes later on, and that's usually simplified by the term the butterfly effect. I think you all are familiar with that term. A butterfly flapping its wings in Tokyo will affect the weather enormously in San Francisco all years later and all that. So we're kind of entering uncharted ground, so to speak.
Thank you.
And I think that's really all I can honestly say about it.
Yeah. So as we can see, there was this fire in LA.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
which really hurt because Chris, you mentioned that I worked at JPL for 2.5 years. Of course, JPL was one of the areas that was, I mean, the lab itself was kept from being burnt, but I understand the fire approached pretty close to it, and a lot of JPL employees were affected by that. In fact, they were on mandatory telework this past week. I haven't read their latest updates on that, on what the conditions are there, but some of those are all my old stomping grounds, so that kind of hit me a little bit again because I'm familiar with that area.
Thank you. Maybe I'll ask the panelists to give the last 2 or 3 questions. Can I ask Peter to ask his questions? Peter?
Yeah. Hi, Alan. First of all, thank you for the great talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
You're welcome.
also to Surgery. Yeah, thank you very much there. So my question is that, based on your experience, which among your discovered comets was the most challenging?
By my discovered comets, you mean, or?
Yes, your discovered comets, which among them was the most challenging for you?
Well, I only had the one discovery, which was Hale-Bopp. I've recovered some comets with LCO, a handful of them. I actually do have a visual recovery of a periodic comet that was 37P Forbes in 1999. I'm surprised that no one got it before I saw it visually, but I saw it visually before anyone else had imaged it. And this occurred after the time that the IAU stopped giving formal recognition to recoveries. But I happened to see Brian Marsden at a conference later that year, and he told me that if the IAU had still recognized recoveries of routine periodic comets, that I would have been credited with the recovery. So everything. Among all the comets I've seen visually, I've seen some ones that have really, really challenged. I actually succeeded in visually detecting Comet Borisov, 2I Borisov, the interstellar comet. That one was extremely challenging. It never got any brighter than about magnitude 14.5. And it was only because we had extremely clear skies for a couple of mornings. It was during December, and here in the New Mexico mountains, we have real winters. And so we actually had to clear some snow off the ground so I could get the scope out and look at it. And so it was cold, but the skies were incredibly clear, and I was able to see it on 2 consecutive mornings, but it was at the extreme limit of visibility. There's been a handful of comets throughout the years that have been kind of close to that level. So, and then on the other extreme, let's see, just a few days ago, seeing Comet Atlas during daytime, which is actually kind of challenging in a way because I have the Meade LX200, but the gears are broken, so I can't do any computerized tracking. I have to do everything manually. And so I did it by doing altitude and azimuth offsets from the sun and eyeballing off the graduated scales on the scope itself. So I could approximate where the comet would be, but then I'd have to kind of move it around with a very narrow telescope field of view to find it. And it's a little harder than it sounds. It's not easy, but I successfully found it. Well, once I saw it, it wasn't hard to see, but it's kind of in a way almost like seeing Venus during the daytime with your naked eye, if you've ever done that. Venus is actually very easy to see with the naked eye during daytime. The hard part is finding it because it's a point source in an infinity of point sources in the sky. Now, if you happen to, if it happens to be, say, lie close to the moon is a bright object, large object you could see in the sky. If the Venus is close to the moon, if you look at the crescent moon, Venus will pop right out. It's right there because your eye is focused on that point and it sees it. If you can line Venus upwards by a tree or a building or something, oh, there it is. But the hard part is finding it. And it's the same way with trying to find a comet in the daytime as well, with that kind of a setup. It was not difficult to see once I found it, but it was finding it.
Thank you. Thank you very
yeah.
much.
Before we go to the last panelist to ask a question, I'll just ask this question. This is an astrophysical question from one of our attendees, Dante de Jesus. And this is a follow-up to his first question. When you say ionized tail interact with the solar wind, does it mean solar wind particles may have captured ions?
You guys started getting a little bit out of my area of expertise here. I don't want to say too much, but I mean the solar wind is charged particles coming from the sun and up the corona. We still don't understand entirely what the solar wind is, in my understanding, but when the solar wind interacts with the comet's electrical environment, it causes the atoms to ionize and fluoresce. Of course, the glow you see there is when if the electrons in our excited state return to their lower states, energy states, and to give off photons in the process. That's what we're seeing when we see that ion tail. Depends on the molecular species. That's generally carbon that's causing that blue light, which carbon is one of the more common ingredients, for lack of a better word, of a comet. And so that's, again, we're seeing the results of that interaction between the solar wind and the comet when we see that. And I don't know if that really answers your question or not. But
I think that's okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Now I would like Edwin to give the last questions for Alan.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Jet. Alan, thank you so much for sharing that your life's journey in comet observing. It's very inspiring. Thank you. Now,
You're welcome.
my
Thank you.
question. Oh, thanks. My question is, I'll leave it up to you if you would like to answer it or not. Let's say, yeah. But this is regarding an infamous event that happened in 1997 when 39 members of the religious cult Heaven's Gate committed mass suicide in California, believing that the arrival of Comet Hale-Bopp signaled to them that it's time for them to leave Earth. So how did that event affect you personally?
It was the busiest day of that entire period. Excuse me. At least from media, because I was getting media inquiries all day long, to the point where I ended up calling a press conference at one of the hotels in the village of Clacroft agreed to use their dining room to host a press conference, and I had people coming from all over the world, media types coming all over the world, where I read a statement and addressed questions. It was a sad event, but the people were committed to doing what they were doing. There was really nothing that really they could do about it, or I could do about it, or anyone else. I mean, there had been all this stuff flying around about this companion to Hale-Bopp and so on. And the people who were convinced, sorry, let me get a drink of water first because my throat's going bad. And we tried to explain to them that no, there was nothing there. I had people challenge me, and I'd challenge them. I'd point the comet out and say, well, look, there's the comet. Where's this companion? Crickets. I was approached a little while later by a telescope retailer based in Oceanside, California, near where this event took place. And turns out the Heaven's Gate cult had actually purchased a rather expensive telescope from him. And then they returned it a few days later, claiming it was defective because they couldn't see the companion. And he tried to explain to them that the reason they couldn't see this companion was because there isn't one. And they didn't want to hear that. They were so convinced that this thing was there that even the evidence of their own eyes would not convince them otherwise. So they were bound and determined to do what they were going to do. The one thing I will say in their defense is at least they didn't feel it necessary to take anybody else with them. At least they went themselves. I happen to have, there's the old 6 degrees of separation, Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees of separation. A couple of degrees of separation with a couple of those. One, a high school friend of mine, actually had dated one of the women who were part of that group for a while. Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek, whom I actually got to know and met at a Star Trek convention and actually had a couple of drinks with her. One of her brothers was one of the cultists who committed suicide as part of that event. Another friend of mine had one time rented a trailer to someone who had later went on to become one of the cult members. So, me personally, I was saddened by the whole thing. I just kind of, in a way, I just kind of shook my head because there's just so much misinformation out there. And all the people I argued with about this companion who were so convinced it was there, and I told them it wasn't. But what do I know? I'm just a scientist, I just followed the thing all the time. But what do I know?
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alan.
Alan, Tarek, I just want to say something about your talk tonight. We've had so much of this speaker series, but tonight showed one thing from both of you. And, you enjoy what you're doing. You both are an inspiration. And what really showed was your passion for what you do. Tarek being at space camp, growing up and pursuing your passion, and Alan's the same way, and the question that was asked earlier about how do you survive, financially, basically, with this passion. And I have to tell you, it's very sometimes I tell Edwin this, how many scientists are multimillionaires, because what is more important to all of us is that we pursue our passion of finding answers to the questions that we ask every single day. And I think the wealth is the knowledge that we acquire. And tonight, I'm hoping that you have inspired many people, and that philanthropists out there would support research in the respective fields of both science and engineering. our extended thing out there in space, our exploration, Tarek, with big rockets, and with Alan, the human side of the science. We talk about comets, we talk about science, we talk about galaxies and all that. But tonight I saw the personal side of that, and I'm really happy that we had both of you speaking to us tonight and to the world.
Thank you.
And thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you again. But before I will have to proceed now. It's getting late there in the United States. So I would like to give our certificate of appreciation to Alan from the Astronomical League of the Philippines, and this certificate is presented to Alan Hale for the webinar entitled On Comets and Other Things, held as part of the Astronomy Expert Speaker Series of 2025, given this 19th day of January 2025, signed by yours truly, Dr. Jose Francisco Aguilar, President, and Andrew Ian Chan, Vice President. We can never thank you enough. Thank you so much, Alan.
You're welcome.
And before we conclude today's webinar, I would also like to thank all our attendees for joining us. We'll be sending you certificates of attendance upon request. And this is actually the 28th webinar in our ALP Astronomy Expert Speaker Series since we started 2 years ago. Our first speaker was the late Dr. Jay Pasakoff on April 23, 2022. Our other esteemed speakers were Salt Lee Wei, Joe Rayo, Mr. Fred Espenac, Robert Reeves, Ken Crawford, Dave Eicher, Professor Matthew Barlow, Scott Roberts, Father Christopher Corbali, Mr. David Levy, Mr. J. Kelly Beatty, of course, Imelda Johnson, Edwin Aguirre, Dr. Daniel Green, Dr. Heidi Heimel, Dr. Deborah Emil Green, Brother Robert McKay, Brother Guy Consolmano, Mr. Hilary Andales, Dr. Valentin Pilet, Mr. Wally Pacholka, Dr. Robert Neminoff, Dr. Michael E. Brown, Dr. Jonathan McDowell, Dr. Brad Schaefer, Dr. Peter Jeniskens, Dr. James Lowenthal, Mr. John Briggs, and of course, for today, Mr. Tariq Malik and Dr. Alan Hale. We are so grateful again to all our webinar speakers who very generously gave their precious time to share their knowledge and expertise to us in the World Astronomical Amateur community. Thank you so much. And for those who missed our previous ALP Astronomy Expert Speaker Series talks, you can view the video recordings of our past webinars, including this one, at your convenience at our official ALP YouTube channel shown here. And for our upcoming free online talks this coming months, please wait for further announcements at our ALP webpage, astroleaguesfields.org, and our ALP Facebook page. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe, clear skies always. And for our panelists, we will be meeting after this. Thank you again. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Tarek.
Guy.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Alan.
Tarek.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Alan,